Tim Lahey, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Tim, you're almost 4 years into your acquisition of a residential technology company. It was small when you bought it, low SDE. We're going to hear your thoughts on buying small. But you've since doubled the business and are aiming for $10 million in revenue by 2027. Let's get right into it, Tim. Please start us off with some background on you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it was a cold, snowy night in 1981. No, I'm just kidding.
Sounds romantic.
Yeah. Well, I won't give the listeners my life story. But yeah, I think similar to a lot of, ETA participants, the community, there's just a through line of where we all looked at this. And for me, I had a great career going for me. I had a career in finance, and I was lucky enough to join an institution called the Federal Home Loan Bank during the housing boom in 2006. So I was fortunate enough to ride a wave where that then led me to Wall Street. And then I participated and lived the great financial collapse. Similar to the book of The Big Short, that was my job. I was buying and selling structured products. And so I bring all this up because I think in a career in corporate, typically when I've talked to other individuals, there's this like constant backbeat of, is there something else out there? There's something else drawing me to something to do here. And for me, I couldn't put a pin on it. I came from some, family tree of entrepreneurs. My grandfather on my mom's side ran a paper business, which I don't know if any of the viewers even know what that would be these days, but it was a really successful paper business. And my dad's dad, who I knew more as a Marine, was also worked in kind of a small version of the oil business here in the Midwest. So like, I don't know, maybe it's genetic, something in the soil, but I had this interest of doing something more with my life in my professional career. And the one thing I thought was unique to me is I always followed that ambition or that thought through sales. I think my dad recognized at an early age I was a persistent little guy and was like, "You're going to be a really good salesperson." And what I think I realized was it was the agency of being able to control like your destiny and the stimulation and the feeling you get when you help someone out and close a deal and all those things. But I was following it through this like different, weird forest of a financial career. And I got my MBA at night. Again, that kind of helped catalyze things. But the reason why I bring that up, and I think this is probably consistent with a lot of individuals that listen to this podcast, or I know guests that you've had on that I've heard. A guy came into my class, and his name was Doug Cook, and it was 2013. So this is probably Rick and Royce era. Not many ETA, not many people were talking about ETA. I had no idea about it, and he was like, "Yeah, it was a great commercial real estate broker." And I left, and I bought a window business, and here in the Midwest in Chicago, you'll know it as Feldco because the ads are everywhere. And he bought and built this really successful business, Feldco. And I was enthralled with this story. I was like, you left your job and bought a business. And I feel like other guests have mentioned this too, but in that era and in 2013 or that ish, vintage, it was startups. It was, do you have an idea? Do you have an idea that you can get funded?
Yep.
Can you get equity? And I worked mentally on that exercise all the time. Like, I was studying entrepreneurship at Kellogg. So I was like, do I have a cool idea? Do I have an idea I can get funded? Know
that personally. Know the experience of that personally. Yep.
Yeah. So when Doug said that and had the story, I was mesmerized. And I left that thinking, okay, this is something to explore. I don't think at that time I was ready to make the leap. It had felt like this really great book you put on the shelf, and then you're like, every day you're looking at it and you're like, I got to pick that book up again. But I was working hard. I was recently married. We were trying to have kids. Like, I don't know. It didn't really, it was just, I don't know if it was the universe, but I wasn't ready. So a couple years later, I had reached a point in my career where I was really doing well. I had, all this potential to maybe get to a place that would really be lifetime, retired job at the Home Loan Bank. But honestly, I don't know if it was the age. I was getting up to my late 30s. For some reason, that quote unquote story of Doug really percolated and boiled over to the point where I didn't have his contact information. I didn't know where he lived, what he did. But, I used my sleuthing skills and I found his email online and shot him a cold email and was just like, can I saw your class 6 years ago. Would you be willing to talk to me? And
I have to say, though, Tim, that's a very flattering email to receive.
Yeah.
It might feel random, but it's like, wait, so I went and did just this little guest lecture one night and left such an impression that somebody in the audience 6 years later is reaching out to me.
Yeah. And I won't ruin the ending of the story, but he's a very important mentor in my life at this point.
Amazing.
I call it my informal board seat. He has a very important role in that board seat because he looks at the world very differently than some of my other mentors. But yeah, I mean, he emailed me that night and was like, I live in North Chicago. Like, I'm available Friday if you want to meet for coffee. And we met for coffee literally blocks from my house. And again, he gave me like 5 hours of his time that day. And he gave me the playbook. And this wasn't a glorification of the journey. This wasn't, it's wealth and riches and everything you want at the end of the rainbow. He was just like, here's how you start and pull that thread. And I'm not trying to sound like this was the early age of ETA, but to me, it just felt like it was still the business broker-ish approach, but biz buy sell. And so I started that process of just talking to people. But, what I think I left that conversation was, I think my foot was out the door. Like, I think I remember not even talking to my wife or anyone and just saying like, holy smokes, like I'm going to follow this. And if there's a blinking red light, I'm going to stop. And I think what I would encourage through any of this conversation is what I did that I would say is pretty necessary is do not be afraid to talk to people. Because that's all I did. I talked to business brokers, I talked to accountants, I talked to lawyers, all within the discovery of what is it like to buy a business? What is the risk? And I love that now podcasts like this, some of the early podcasts too. Yeah, I mean, we're all beholden to Rick and Royce, and that there was books, but there was like, you still had to do this like hardcore kind of discovery work of what is it out there. And I know there's huge presence on X and like immediate, like there's all these amazing sources now. And at that point, at least when I started, I just felt like it was more of a hustle. And what I essentially put together was, here's the risk. It's not going to be easy. Here's some guidance. And, if you want it, you should go do it. That was it. Like, I wasn't,
Tim.
Yeah.
What, and the path that you were on in corporate, you said that you could see a path or a promotion that would set you up kind of for life, or I'm not sure what you meant. So add some color to that, because I think understanding the opportunity cost here would be good.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, so I mentioned going to business school at night. I worked at an institution not many people know of. It's called the Federal Home Loan Bank System. They treated me extremely well. I had a career where I was given opportunity. They supported me as I went to business school at night. They put me in positions where, you were kind of, they knew that you didn't know what you were doing, but they wanted to see if you could grab it, and you did. But I had reached a point there where even with all that, something else was calling to me. As maybe existential as that sounds, I had just been wrestling. I was like, this is great. And right as my career was kind of peaking, I was asked to join this group. It was kind of like a special forces group internally to help restructure the bank and help put the culture forward. Very process oriented, so Lean Six Sigma. And so I completed that and was like, okay, well, this is, my next step here is going to be part of the leadership team. And that prospect was right there in front of me. No one could ever give you a timeline on it. But even with all that, I just felt unsettled. And I think what it came down to, as many of us do, you do that self-reflection exercise. You go for those long walks. You try to figure out what's going on here. What it really came down to is like, I wanted to control my destiny. I wanted the agency. I certainly didn't want to give up any financial benefit. I wanted to feel like if I could maximize the stimulation and the agency of growing something and achieve the same or more financial wins, that's worth kind of the big swing, right, at the pitch.
But being leadership at that company would have been just being mercenary here and thinking about numbers only. Would have been high six figures into the seven figures annually, probably. And so $1 million a year, you were potentially very likely walking away from.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what it is now eventually, but I think for me, I would also be part of running an organization that gave so much to me back. So like it was like all that for me. I still think it's one of the best places to work and can still be one of the best places to work. But I was just, clearly there was something calling out.
So what did the parameters of when you decided you were going to do this, and I liked how you put it, you were just going to do it until there was a flashing red light. I've heard other people characterize that their search that way on a deal, like on a specific deal. Well, I'm just going to follow this deal and wait until something stops me, and nothing ever stops me. And then they find, that they're signing on the dotted line, and you kind of approach search itself that way. But what were some of the parameters of this search?
Yeah, the parameters was I wasn't ready to really move. I think the geographical parameter for me was it had to be within an hour and a half, 2 hours driving distance of where I lived where I live in the north suburbs of Chicago. And I make that point because I've met a ton of people who are like, yeah, I mean, it's my wife and I, we don't have any kids. We'll move to Anchorage if it's the right fit. Yeah. That was the first parameter. And then size was the second. I was like, listen, I'm not going to, my dad would say this from a golf analogy, like I didn't come here to lay up, like I'm going for it. And then from there it was, and part of the story is an important thing is like, that was it from a parameter. I had such an open mind to what kind of business I was going to buy that it led the search process to probably take longer than it should. And the biggest line that I'll steal, and I probably should give royalties to Doug Cook for, was like, my guiding principle was, dusty, not rusty. Like what business could I apply my energy to and accelerate it out of the gate versus something that was just like, could not benefit from inertia and my energy. And if you apply that principle, you're not filtering a lot of business. I mean, you're starting to filter pretty well, but I was really industry agnostic. And, I think what was helpful was, ironically, during the pandemic had just started. So we were all working from home. So I would work during the day and then spend nights like in my room or in my office. Was a makeshift office at the point, but I was like researching these industries, and you were able to kind of really move at a fast clip, where I felt like traditional process that happened, especially with business brokers, that they would, let's drive around, let's look at this business. I was doing this pretty remotely. And so, it led me, it was a very inefficient process to start. And I was working with a business broker. I was looking through Biz Buy Sell, and I was like, well, this is an intellectual exercise, but I'm going nowhere from a career next step. And it was at that point that I went to look for a company or a firm that could essentially partner with me and had the structure to kind of push me and keep going. And that was a middle market to kind of small middle market M&A firm, Sun Acquisitions, here in North Chicago.
Tim, what were your size criteria? I don't think you said.
Yeah,
you said that was one of them.
I mean,
right?
I knew I already wanted to get pre-qualified for the Max SBA, which I forget what it was in 2019, but I think it was like 5 or 6 million.
5 million.
So I was like, anywhere up to that, I was game. We had been.
Did you have a floor? Did you have something that would be too small?
Yeah, which I broke, but
right.
It was, I didn't want to go under $500,000 SDE. And really that number, it's been a while since I picked up Rick and Royce. I think theirs was like $250,000, don't touch, or it's not worth it. But, because similarly, I had viewed the jarring impact of leaving a 400 person institution where I had an HR, I had a legal, I had all these resources, to a company of 4. I was like, that's not good. I'm not built to be all those chief executives, which we'll learn. I still did, but that's why I had the floor as well. Is I was like, I want structure in place. Like I'm only one person.
Sure. And when you said that you weren't making any progress, that it was an valuable intellectual exercise to be doing the search to the extent that it was a search, but you weren't getting anywhere, is that because your deal flow, you'd run through the available deals and
you got it. Yeah.
Even searching part-time, you were exhausting the deal flow, even in Chicago.
You got it.
Interesting.
Exactly.
That must have been pretty thin pickings.
It felt thin pickings. There's only so many pizza restaurants that are up for sale you're gonna look at in west suburbs of Chicago, or a chemical manufacturing plant that was just outside of your geographical range. Like it tests. What I was looking for was who was up for sale, who had raised their hand and said, "I'm ready." Yeah. And what I was kept thinking about from a deal flow perspective, essentially, I had friends in VC and private equity, and maybe this was some of my education at Kellogg. Like, there's still a deal flow to tap into that are folks that maybe haven't raised their hand but are thinking about raising their hand. Yep. But I had no clue how to approach them. I was what I know now, and what I love seeing individuals doing is my first job out of college was cold calling. Ironically, selling technology to school districts, but that hustle, like cold calling letters, that's how you get, I think, a quality lead, a deal flow. Because if they're raising their hand and they're putting themselves out to public market, there's some questions that you want answered of why. And if you get the timid owner who's thinking about it, maybe it's a year from retirement, that to me at that time, and I still feel this way, that's a high quality, high potential deal flow you wanted to tap into. So I started to do a little bit of cold emailing and approach, but I was like, what I had interviewed with Dom, who runs Sun Acquisitions, and they had a buy side team, and they were like, listen, part of our approach is we'll do that work for you. We'll put out letters. We'll work with you to figure out the industry. We're not going to help you do the intellectual exercise, but when you say this industry, we'll start attacking it, cold calling and emails. And that was really attractive to me. I could afford it. I could afford to pay that investment, which I felt was, if this reaches a blinking red light, I'll have paid, X amount of dollars. And I said, well, listen, maybe that will tame the beast and I can return back to work and, kick butt at the Home Loan Bank.
Can you share what those costs were, roughly?
Yeah, I think it was about $20,000 up front to get started, which is not including, obviously, the success fees that a broker or a M&A firm will do as well. But I mean,
$20,000 that can be applied to the success fees,
yes,
probably.
Exactly. So
And how much did that 20K give you? Was it 20K then XK a month, or was that 20K for a 6-month engagement?
It was a year engagement. It was a year engagement. Yeah. And I think what helped is that, again, this isn't a time of incredible global uncertainty. So the pandemic was starting to really take hold. And so I think I was fortunate as a potential buyer, because no one was really thinking about buying a business when COVID was starting. And so not that anyone was desperate, but I think I had the advantage of working with the team at Sun Acquisitions. We're like, well, you're one of the few that are out there looking, so we're happy to help. Which I don't know if I was just a lunatic at the time. It seems a little crazy recounting that story, but yeah, I was. So I signed on with them, and what we did was essentially that. The only problem I still had was I was industry agnostic, and so I was looking at fence repair companies, garage door repair companies. I looked at event. There was this idea that probably was still good, that some of these event companies were now going to become live streaming companies, and I remember kicking the tires on 2 of them in Wisconsin. I would drive up to Wisconsin and met with the owners, and I was all over the place. It wasn't because I was confused. I just had this really broad thesis of dusty, not rusty. Sure. And you're like, well, why couldn't it be an event-based company like this if I applied my energy? So finally, Larry Sanderman, who works for Dom, I remember this conversation very clearly. It was like an early morning. He's like, Tim, we have to start kind of going towards one industry. And the thing you need to ask yourself is like, are you going to wake up every day and kind of get out of bed and be excited that, you're fixing garage doors? Or are you going to be excited about a company in home technology? And the reason why he brought up home technology is because when we were doing our industry conversation, it was like last on the list. They had never even heard of the industry. And I had brought it up because I was like, well, I'm familiar with technology. I'm a little bit of a home nerd. I was the kid in 4th grade that was like in computer science. Like I was kind of that nerd, but I also loved home technology. I had experience with what is classically known as the AV industry. And I was like, it's kind of an interesting business. So he's like, well, why have we not looked at these companies? And I think what was holding me back was I think it was in my mind is like, this would be cool, but is it the right investment? What is the potential for the AV industry? And literally like the next week or two, you started hearing about corporations going fully remote. And I'm like, wait a second here. People are going to be spending a ton of time at home. They definitely don't have adequate Wi-Fi. They're definitely going to look around at their TVs. They're definitely going to look around. There's going to be a need here. And what people don't realize is like, you can use Amazon for home technology. You can use Best Buy, but who the companies, the industry that really advises you on what you need is this industry that was called AV at the time.
Tim, let me pause you there because I want to dive more into the industry and the opportunity you saw, which, by the way, perfect timing. Good for you. Just what Dom or was it Sam who came to you and said, so they were basically expressing to you this search that we're doing on your behalf needs to be a little bit more directed. Yeah. I'm actually surprised that they said narrow your aperture, not widen it, because typically when a search is not delivering much, it's because somebody is too specific in what they want. Yeah. So let's loosen some of your criteria. Yeah. No, they said let's tighten up your criteria. Well, I just explain that to me. Why was that?
I think because my aperture was so wide that, and I mean, I had gotten, it wasn't like I was doing theoretical exercises. I drove to Milwaukee to interview an event company. I would interview garage door openers. I mean, I've looked back at my notes from some of these calls, like I was pulling that thread, but it got to a point where each time I got close, I would kind of say to myself, yeah, I don't know if it's for me. And I think they might have playing almost like business therapists at the time and saying like, Tim, you're never going to get off you're never going to get off the starting line unless you start answering those questions that can tighten your aperture. I mean,
gotcha.
I think when
they perceived that you were not able to pull the trigger, perhaps because you couldn't find the passion in these businesses.
Yeah.
So they were delivering you good leads.
Yeah.
And you just couldn't act on them, or you couldn't close.
Yeah.
And they perceive that.
And I mean, when I've talked to others, I don't think it's a needed criteria to be passionate. I think you can, as an entrepreneur, that's the thing. The thing is the core of that, you know. And I know myself, I would have loved running a garage door company. But if you think of where Zero started, which it's Tim, who has this great career, he's a wife and kids. You know, I was still somewhat risk averse and unsure of this journey. And I think what they recognized was like, if you're going to get comfortable doing this, we need to kind of understand your level, like what's going to get is a passionate thing like technology going to be the thing that gets your butt off the seat and go. And kudos to them. It was a good industry thesis. It wasn't like, Tim, you've always talked about car washes. Why aren't we doing car washes? I think what we both realized was like, Tim, the career home loan banker, father of three, career guy, he's only going to really do this unless he finds that little spark. And I don't think we were out of ideas. I think they were just saying, let's take that idea and see if that gets you going. Mm-hmm. And as soon as we did that, we were off. It was a very different search process for me, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Really, they're perceptive on your psychology there. Yeah. Okay, so back to this industry. You mentioned in passing, it used to be called the AV industry, audio video. It's old school. You call it home technology or residential technology. What exactly is this industry?
Yeah.
And you refer to Amazon and Best Buy. So it's not buying your own TV. What is it?
Yeah. So it's not retail.
Right.
But essentially you're like a home consultant for what those needs are. And I'd say predominantly this occurs in the new construction, renovation phase, where somebody is thinking about their home, they're building it, renovating it, and they want to take advantage of that process to actually make their home, let's call it a smart home. Not a huge fan of that label either, but essentially I'll boil it down to this. Homes need an infrastructure to support today's technology needs and the technologies 10, 20 years from now. That really gets down to the cabling, the wiring, and the design. And from there, you can do anything you want. But you can't go to Best Buy when you're building a home and say, can you help design and wire my home to optimize the Wi-Fi, to get audio distribution, to do that? And, in the 80s and 90s, what AV really was I want a big TV, which probably weighed 100 tons. I want more than 2 speakers, and I want a receiver. I was fortunate enough to get some early experience with this. My dad, I probably got this from my dad. He was kind of a tech guy too, at least whatever that meant in the 80s and 90s. And I'll never forget, he played the video cassette from the first Top Gun, and he I think it was my brother and I, and if my sister's listening, I apologize if I forget she wasn't there, but he would turn up the stereo system to like 11. Little Spinal Tap call out, and you'd hear that first scene where the plane takes off, and that experience was delivered by that AV company. I forget the name it was. So what the AV industry has basically ridden the wave of has been the trusted advisor for the home needs of technology. In 1980 and 1990, it was stereo, it was plasma TVs. But I mean, if you think about 2024, one of our largest revenue streams in our growing business is motorized shades, is intelligent lighting through Lutron. You know, like that. Those are the two of the largest chunks compared to installing a TV, and those needs are going to continue to expand because there's a benefit and a convenience and a joy of having these things work intelligently. They don't
Tim,
have to be,
how have I not heard you mention Nest and all the traditional smart home? You don't like that term, smart home technologies. I would have thought that would be the key driver here.
It is. I think what those play out, a Nest, an Eero, the DIY version of home technology, that market is great. It's strong, it's wonderful, and I think what it allows you to do is not have to, have someone come in your home and do it. And frankly, part of my thesis was, in terms of our diversification of offerings, we'll do that for you. What you quickly realize is these products are not designed to last super long. The average consumer is becoming less familiar with how to do this stuff. Their understanding of how technology works, in my personal view, is actually becoming less. And so the DIY market share is great. And I'm never going to say to someone, don't do an Nest thermostat. What I will say is that will work. And if it doesn't work in another year, if it doesn't work the year after that, you might want to consider asking for help from us, because we can probably apply a different solution that's going to last longer. There are rumors and thoughts that this industry is the next nut to crack from Google's and Apple's and Amazon's standpoint. And there's huge approaches like Matter and things like that, where I think they're circling the wagons. But what you realize is you need to have boots on the ground expertise. And I will make the argument in our industry, the talent we have in our team is your secret asset. They're the individuals that understand this stuff from soup to nuts. And that's your key asset. And Apple and Google and Amazon, they can't really deploy that at scale. They can make the hardware, and the software makes it so extremely easy to do, but it's really hard. I mean, Sonos is a great example. Probably they've had the most success allowing any individual to plug it in and get going, but they have a large portion of their business that is through the professional install industry, which is what they call our industry. We're one of the largest providers of Sonos in Chicago. So they play both.
It's one of these where the consumer products are fine to a point, one size fits all, simple configurations that a consumer can do. But once you kind of want a little bit more complexity or a little bit more integration or multiple rooms, like just that next level in complexity, you either need to be a hobbyist and really want to take on a big home project, or you farm it out to experts. And so, and that presumably also means that you're serving people who are consumers who are high income, obviously higher income. Yeah.
And the biggest then kind of next iterative thinking on this, which is when I wrote down, because this is what you do when you're a business school grad, you write down your thesis. My thesis of buying into this industry was all service. Because if you play out all these things, regardless if it's a Nest thermostat or a Sonos amplifier or some sort of high-grade, high-end design, at the end of the day, it's going to break. Electronics, Moore's Law, all these things make electronics, the half-life is like 6 months. Who are they going to call to fix it? There's no 800 number at Apple. You can go to the Genius Bar. You can't call Google to fix it. So who are you going to call? And so my initial thesis was we're going to be the next home service platform that is aligned with HVAC, that is aligned with plumbing, that is aligned with high voltage. The challenge with that, and I still hold on to that thesis. I think it's evolved and morphed into something else. but you need the talent to do that. You need to train or hire or have the people that can walk into Will's home and say, hey, let me fix your Wi-Fi for you, and let me fix your TV for you, and great. And now you're this trusted person.
So that a really interesting thesis though there, Tim. We got electrical, HVAC, and plumbing, and in the future we'll have home tech.
You got it.
Home tech will be the fourth in that basket of kind of big trades serving home services consumers. Fascinating. And so give us a picture of what the industry looks like from a how big is it? How many players are there? Et cetera. How you were going to attack this market? Yeah.
So the appealing numbers to me, there's the two things that was really nice when you look at an industry and there's good trade magazines, there's good trade publications, there's good, what you can see is like a good foundation to supporting the industry. I recognize that CEDIA, CEDIA, and CE Pro are these like two things I could tap into to learn a lot about it. And at the time, I think their numbers were like it's a 20 billion market. Today, it's easily 30 plus, and it's just great. I mean, I just think it continues to grow because since I've been in this industry, the supporting winds to grow is, you can just stick your hand out and you're going to get the next project because people have those needs, but it's serviced by many companies. There are no barriers of entry. There's no certification. So if we're going to compare kind of our sister industry in high voltage, there's regulations that are embedded in federal and state and here in Chicago, like local laws of what you can and can't do. There's a trade school apparatus. So, an interested individual can go to a trade school, become a certified electrician, and enter the trades or enter the unions like they have here. There are unions, to your point. There are unions. I mean, established, decades-old unions. Oh yeah, not in low voltage, but in high voltage.
In high voltage.
Yeah. So
right. Yeah. And when you say high voltage, that's industry speak for electricians.
You got it. You got it.
And low voltage is
us.
Is you guys.
See, I'm already, my genetic code has already changed doing this for 4 years. But yeah, I mean, so there's all this. You compare that versus us in this industry. A listener can hear this podcast tomorrow and sign up to be a local dealer at a local distribution electronics store that they have in any city and start selling TVs. There's just no certification. So think about that from a really high altitude. It's heavily fragmented just naturally. Additionally, I have been extremely lucky to now, be close friends with some very experienced individuals in this industry who I'm fortunate to call my peers. These are individuals that started just like that. They were a hobbyist. They worked at Circuit City or Tweeter, which were old electronics stores, or they worked at Car Audio and got really good, really smart, and built their business. And so the typical and common owner is someone who's emphatic about this industry, loves it, loves doing it, knows everything about it. The clients usually love that individual, right? I haven't seen a lot of examples where it's the company brand that's getting the recognition and the referral. It's the individual. It's Will, it's Tim. And so that's the common, picture. And I think what the term I hear a lot is like, it's a lifestyle business. You can cap it at a certain level where you're doing really interesting things. You're making good money. You've developed a career, let's say, in something you love. And that's there's some pride and joy in just reaching that top. And then once you blow back through that ceiling, then you start to have 10, 15, 20 million revenue businesses that start to attack regional and multi-regional strategies. So I'm going to be in Chicago. I'm going to be in Naples, Florida. I'm going to be in Aspen. And then now you're deploying almost a franchise-ish type approach where you have boots in the ground locally. And that's like really the spread of who's in this industry. We are seeing, and I'm thinking it's coming even more, a lot of private equity and even venture capital. I've seen, I'm not sure why, the venture capital side, but there's interest in rolling this world up as well. Because I think similar to my thesis, but also they see, the benefit of having multi-state, multi-local level AV companies, residential technology companies, and the macroeconomics of it are like, it's just not going to stop for a while because of the growth and need.
And so when you thought as a searcher going into this market about this spectrum that you just described for us, which sounds kind of barbellish, where you have lots of chucks and trucks,
nice.
That's not exactly to right. disparage,
not
really little guys, and key person risk, no brand, no real companies. And then on the other side, you have quite big organizations. What was how did you approach that? What was the opportunity for you to get in?
Yeah, I was here in Chicago. There's some really, really great incumbents who have been doing it for 30 years, super reputable, great names. And that's where I was like, all right, let's see if they're interested in, because they had stakes in the ground. They had embedded relationships with builders and specifiers that you could extract. And, as we kind of sent word and was looking, there was just not a lot of interest. I think looking back, I talk about advantages of this time. There was a lot of disadvantages. The phone wasn't being picked up because, frankly, individuals were thinking about their livelihood, their teams. This industry was an essential business at the time. And for me, it's a little hard to remember what it was like in 2021. But remember, at least here in Chicago, there was some industries that were deemed essential that were allowed to function. So despite that, though, it doesn't mean that Will was going to allow you into your home. It doesn't mean that Tim was really psyched you were going to come in their home. What we essentially realized was you were the AV industry. What we are was one of the few industries they wanted in their home, because their Wi-Fi was getting super taxed because their kids were taking school at home. They were doing all these things at home that were really showing the weaknesses in whatever technology strategy they had. But as an incumbent, I think they were all looking at that like, this is a problem I need to solve. I'm not going to pick up a call from a potential buyer right now. And so, it gave me pause. So I started looking in surrounding states, seeing if there was any interest there. And as we went down in size, we started to see that there was potential for more interest in doing it. I can't really explain why. Maybe those individuals were just being tapped out in general. But I had to kind of sit back and say to myself, all right, the floor is starting to get close. So what does that look like? And I said to myself, well, I'm a first-time entrepreneur, at least through acquisition. I'm a first-time, I have a family. Maybe it makes my risk, appetite. Maybe my risk profile is less if I'm buying small, and maybe I buy a couple. Which, I can laugh at today. I think we all can. When you're on the other side of when you reflect on what your understanding of what this journey would look like before, it's gonna obviously be very different than what it was. But I think, I had some overconfidence because I was like, listen, I got this. I know what I'm doing. I think I know what I'm doing. And if I do 2 or 3 and roll them up together, now I'm really assembling kind of my target. And so that's the thesis that I pulled on. And when I did that, yeah, go ahead.
Well, Tim, so you did the $1 million or $500,000 to $1 million SDE businesses did exist.
Yeah.
They just weren't picking up the phone.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to clarify that because I recalled from our pre-call that there was this dynamic where there weren't good entry points for private equity. So while private equity likes this space, there are all of the tiny little guys, and then there's the quite big guys. But a good platform opportunity for a private equity shop doesn't really exist. Meaning a 2 or 3 million EBITDA business or 4 or 5 million EBITDA business.
Yeah.
And so one of the opportunities you perceived was in building that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But there were $1 million, $500,000 to $1 million SDE businesses. Okay. But they didn't get much bigger than that. But
exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you think about the coastal cities like Miami or New York or San Francisco, cost of living's a lot higher. There's $50 million homes, $70 million homes. And then you kind of, let's say your middle income is a lot bigger than maybe the upper income here in the Midwest. Those it's a little more common to have maybe a $15 to $20 million revenue business with, call it a $1.5 to $2 million SDE company. Because a lot of those players then follow their clients to vacation homes in Montana, and like it's a nice jumping off point. I'm a Midwesterner, love Midwest, but there's just a different persona here where those large projects that would fill a pipeline, call it a handful, I call them whale hunters. It was just less obvious. And so the ones that were playing here that had made, let's call it $1 million SD business, were playing in the big jobs, but also the mediums, and had just really, like, they'd been at it for a long time and developed all those relationships. They just weren't picking up the phone.
Yep. Gotcha. Okay. So you had to lower the floor, and then you started getting a little bit more traction.
Yeah. A ton. And I think, I know from other folks that went into this, in the journey at a lower SDE, I think what you find is individuals that are probably fitting the mold I had always said to myself, which is dusty, not rusty. They had tired out. They had, they're tapping out. And I would argue that a plateau on a small level allows you to extract and add value immediately. I mean, like day one. That's what I was thinking. And I think I proved that right. So it's also
that's very tempting. I want to hear about that. So let's get in. Let's hear what you bought, and then I want your reflections on having bought small. So tell us about Home Run Technology.
Yeah. So Home Run Technology had been in business for about 15 years. There was 2 owners, really steady revenue for the 10 years up until when I bought it. And they had, what I was also looking for was good relationships, good referral relationships. And they had that. Unfortunately with this process, like the thing you want to do is just sit there and talk to employees while you're prospectively acquiring. I don't know of a way you can do that today, but that's what I couldn't do. Cause you really want to get the nitty gritty, but fundamentals all look strong. The economics looked strong. They were fine. They weren't. It was, you go to the used car lot and you're like, this is a good car. It has some miles on it, and I'm sure it'll be fine. And to me, in my head, I was like, okay, again, I knew I was taking a risky part of my life in general, but I was like, this makes me feel my stomach's less churning at this. That if this fails, I won't be wiping out my net worth. I won't be wiping out the equity you've grown just from a net worth standpoint. Like it'll be worth it. I'll have learned a tremendous, but I won't be on the street. I won't be on the street with my wife and kids. So I just said, let's go for it. And kudos to them at the time. The sellers were really open, and we had a lot of good conversations. I know there's a lot of people in the ET community always talk about the deal and the structure. This was very clean. It was, seller note. It was just very kind of typical, safe SBA deal.
Can you share with the revenue and SDE and?
Yeah.
terms and everything were?
So I think at 2020's year end, it was about 1.6 with like 230 in SDE. It was a really clean P&L and balance sheets. There wasn't a lot of backouts. There wasn't a lot of like, what's this? And they, the hardest part I think about this analysis was a project-based business has a lot of work in progress, right? Yeah. So how do you, and if you think, let's call it 3/4 or no, let's call it 1/4 of the annual revenues actually in progress. How do you divvy that up? How do you understand that? And at a small company, and this was true of Home Run, there wasn't really a mechanism to understand what was in progress. So that was the dicey part. That was the hairy thing from both the, under the LOI to then post acquisition of being like, okay, what do we got going on?
Right. And of course, just that's an enormous working capital question, because if you've got a project that's halfway done, but you've received, 100% of the payment for it, that cash, half of that cash still needs to be spent because you've only completed half the project. Yeah. So you could get in there, find yourself needing to service all of these projects underway and not having the cash to do it. So it's both just complex in terms of understanding what the cash position is, but there's you can get bitten really badly on a cash flow crunch if you don't understand how much of the cash you've already received needs to be deployed in terms of service.
And we did. Absolutely. And we did. Like, I got bit real bad because it was like a rubber band and snapped when I bought the business. We had not only work in progress that I needed to understand, but our demand was like out of the gate. And part of you is like, you're just in jubilation. You're like, this is great. And guess what? No shot at my lovely brethren at Kellogg or what I learned at the Home Loan Bank. No one teaches you that. And I didn't have a private equity background. I didn't have I was this newly minted entrepreneur and thought I understand. Come on, like Excel. I dream in Excel. Like, I got this, and you don't. And I think that was really hard for me. And I'm being very frank with you and the listeners. That was a really, really tough moment to be like, I don't know what's going on here. And that's exactly what happened. Will was, we had a great working capital line. I think it was, if I remember right, 150 grand, and flew through it. And in the first year alone, I put probably equal to what our working capital line in additionally, because we were growing. The other really tough part of that story was the mechanisms, the key focus for project-based business is what is your margin per project? Mm-hmm. And again, buying a smaller target allows you to add value on day one, but you don't have those tools and mechanisms on day one. So when you're writing jobs, when you're selling projects, and you're not entirely sure what the estimated margin is, but more importantly, what the actual margin is, that revenue is great. But if you're writing it underneath your kind of floor gross margin, you're actually hurting the company. And so not only that, but you're also like, how are we measuring actual labor? The tools you needed to be there on day one. And I knew that. So I'll give myself a pat on the back. I knew I needed those tools, but you can't install them quick enough because you are selling every day. And so we were growing, but we were writing jobs at a margin that was sub what we needed. And so it's almost like this car is just driving so fast that the fuel is showing that it's full, but it's really empty. And you're like, great, we have 1,000 miles left. You don't. And
did you have any fetal position moments?
And I think everyone, I don't like. I have a hard time wanting to glorify this journey because I think it's really important for any individual to just like say to themselves, like, this has got to be something you want, because the fetal position moment will happen. And It was a test of my mettle. It was a test of my grit. Again, this is also during COVID. I was going through my dad was really sick at the time. I was going through all this stuff, and it tests you. And I'm not saying, it needs to be boot camp and that you need to like toughen up. But I think individuals who look at this path and think it's about the Excel sheet and cash flowing business and operating is great and look at the freedom, yes, but also be prepared for the fetal moment, the position moment. And I think when you do it and then you, let's say, rise out of it, which I think we're where I am today, what I got out of that is what I always thought I would get, which is this is the journey that has taught me more in 4 years than anything I would have done in 4 years because of coming out of that first year.
To be clear, your fetal position moment or moments had to do with working capital and paying everybody. I mean, just keeping the company above water, and that includes paying everybody.
Yeah, so you get that. We're also in that high net worth, ultra high net worth clientele. So at the time, service was coming just directly into the office or through text messages to employees. We had no apparatus like we do now where someone calls a support line. So I would get an email or a text on a Friday night. And I mean, listen, I love my shows. I love to watch TV. The emotional feeling someone has after a long work week of not being able to watch their Netflix on a Friday and just relax is emotional. It is an emotional thing. That's why I love this industry, is we're here to help. But then you had that coming in too. And you're like, what is going on? Clients aren't happy. We're running out of cash. Do I have the right people here? And we're growing. And you're like, so I would say for sure, Will, number one was cash, working capital. And number two was like, are we not, I had been trained at the Home Loan Bank early from Amazon had come up with this. They were starting to share their framework of like customer centric and working backwards from the customer journey. And I was a disciple of that. And so I was like, I'm going to use that when I'm building the business. When that KPI, we'll call it our metric, is flashing yellow because people can't watch their Netflix and you're running out of cash, you're like, what is going on here? And I felt that. And yeah, I think any owner should understand what it's like to have a disgruntled client. Working in sales, the advantage was I had the skin, I had the thick skin to handle it. But as an owner, you're very insecure about like, this is year one. How are we not making these experiences awesome? And how are we running out of cash and we're growing? It was soup. So that was contributing to the fetal position moment.
It was a feeling of not really understanding the drivers in your business and not being in control.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You are, the analogy I used to use is the plane is increasing in altitude, you're rebuilding it, and the wings are coming off while you're doing it. And, I don't think I love hearing about those of us in the ETA community that buy and accelerate out of the gate. And like, just that plane is steady altitude and slowly growing. And like, I'm envious of that. I look back at this first year as it was a really important step for where I am today because it accelerated my understanding of this. And I'm appreciative of that because we wouldn't have grown the business the way we did unless, trial by fire is at least the way I could put the way I could put it.
And you bought in, when did you buy exactly?
So we closed in February of 2021. It was really hard to actually, I had to say goodbye to a lot of my peers at the Home Loan Bank in January over video because we were all in lockdown. And, I just switched over, and February of 2021, literally the first, was the start. And that's when we closed.
And so now, Tim, you've given us the context of how challenging it was that first year. And you had started to tell us about buying small. So now connect those two vectors of thought.
Yeah. What I quickly realized was buying smaller challenges. And I think what you realize is you have this weird relationship between you can extract value on day one, right? And I think I've said to you before, like anything I did in year one, any one of your listeners would have done. It wasn't rocket science. Buying more vans, buying uniforms. We rebranded out of the gate as Our Home. I wanted to start a new path on that. We got the right people in the right seats, not to steal from EOS, but like it just was like, got it.
This is the dusting part of the dusty. It was the
dusting,
dusty,
exactly.
Not rusty business. Yeah. You're just dusting it off.
Yeah, and I think
and it's easy. Okay.
If you take the working capital challenges out of it, it was a really good year to reposition the company. The company, the other thing about buying small is your assessment analysis of that target is going to be off. And it's going to be off by a decent factor, meaning that car on the lot is likely more of a lemon than you think. And that is not a shot at the sellers or the history of Home Run, but the way I wanted the company to be, it required more work than you originally thought. And guess who has to do that work? It's you. It's you who have to roll up your sleeves, and you have to accept that the only way this thing is going to get the value you want on day one is if you're there, and you're there on the weekends, and you're trying to push the ball forward. So I think the beauty of it is where we are today. I think what I realized for sure is my understanding and appetite to buy 2 more companies within the first year was not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good thing. I think I would have overpaid. I think the culture clash of smashing 3 small targets together in year one without a leadership team would have been disastrous. And I got to give kudos to a lot of those people that I originally networked with when I was searching, who ultimately are now, mentors. The advice that I got was like, you're over your skis thinking you're going to smash 3 companies together in your first year. And I was like, yeah, I mean, that played out. Now, I also think this idea of buying small, if you want to get a master's in that industry, buying small allows you to do that. It allows you to really, if my sleeves are rolled up, I'm going with guys to help install technology. I'm learning how network topography works. I'm literally in the weeds. I'm becoming a quick, not as well trained as my peers who've been doing it for 30 years, but I'm quickly ramping up. I think if I bought a large AV company, I would literally sit in my office and I would apply the frameworks and things I had learned from business school or my corporate life. And I would be definitely a high altitude playing strategic moves. And in EOS world, you call it like the true visionary role. But I don't think I would have learned and understood what makes this industry tick, and which also then feeds into the vision and strategy for how this industry can be different. We're a very
Tim, let me stop you. Let me stop you there. I think what you were about to say plays into where I want to conclude our conversation, which we'll do in a minute here. But before we get too far away from the terms of the deal, I just want to, I always like to give numbers here. So the business was doing, you said 220-ish, 230-ish SDE.
Correct.
It was a very standard acquisition. So what did you pay for it, if you don't mind?
It was, I think 2.3 times SDE. There was a 10% seller note.
Okay.
So even for SBA, smaller side of the SBA parameters, or at least what it was in 2020 and 2021. And then I got a working capital line from the lender as well. So, like pretty vanilla, I would think.
Yeah. But your point about you felt like call it $500,000 you paid for the business.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
And so you felt, going back to that calculation of downside, if you lost this business altogether, if you just, things ran into the ground, you'd be on the hook for $500,000.
Mhm.
This wouldn't ruin you forever. You could
No.
absorb that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to understand exactly.
Yeah. And
yeah.
I mean,
whereas if you bought a $5 million business and run it into the ground, you could not have absorbed that.
Well, the beauty of the SBA program as it stands today was, and I came from a banking background and underwriting background, is the SBA does a thorough search of you and understands what you can and can't absorb. So I could absorb the max limit through the SBA. They're not going to write you that loan unless they've shown you the assets, you have the collateral to support that downside risk. Versus a search fund, I think the economics are a little different. Like when you're borrowing, they are going to say, Tim Lahey, you need to be able, this is a government sponsored program. We have government in the secondary market of SBA loans. They're government backed. You better be able to have the collateral and assets to do it. So I was approved for the full range. Do I want to lose? Do you want to lose almost everything on the higher end of the loan? No. Are you willing to lose a smaller part because you shot your shot and you go back to the bank hat in hand and hopefully they're going to hire you back or you're going to work for a similar type of institution? That felt to me a little bit, okay, like I can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Tim, just something you're saying about the SBA looking at a borrower and saying, can they absorb the full balance of this loan? So wait, are you saying that that anybody takes a $5 million loan has the assets to pay, has $5 million in assets to pay it off if things go sideways?
No, and I wasn't implying it's a 1-for-1 collateral.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, yeah, but you have to, like, to your point, there's a stack of collateral between the business and personal assets that has to feel comfort to the lender that will make them whole in case this doesn't work. And that you can't have nothing. You don't necessarily need to have a 1-for-1 $6 million net worth of liquid funds at home, but they're not going to let someone who has, I don't know what the number is, but like you get any SBA lender, at least, and again, 4 years is a long time. The program could be more open or not. But at the time, it was a full-on cavity search of me and my net worth and what we had to present, we being me and my family, my wife and kids, to present as collateral. And that wasn't an easy process. It wasn't, I mean, again, I think it's good to do a full cavity search for any lender, but it was a thorough process because they would want to make sure that you are not going to fall short in the loan between you and the business. But if I was implying it was a 1-to-1 relationship, no, that's, I didn't have $6 million in cash to give them if the business foreclosed.
Okay. Good. You had said also that something that I've heard many variations on, which is the business you buy isn't the business you think you bought. And so there were things you got in that you had not seen from the outside, even though you had a pretty sophisticated understanding of what this would be. What were some of the things that did surprise you, despite thinking that you kind of really had thought deeply about what this business would be? Do you remember any?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a lot. Culture. I just think that at a micro level, it amplifies its importance, and it is a living, breathing organism that can change each day. And I don't know, when I came from a 400-person company, we talked about it in it almost felt like a large aircraft carrier. It's slowly moved around, and at the small level, it can shift. If one person of 10 is having a bad day, that can shift the morale. That can somebody has a project go bad, it can shift bad. And you, as the owner, and at the time I didn't have a leadership team. I have one now, but almost standing there very open to this. those are shifting things you need to handle, I believe. And on top of that, you're handling all the other things. So that was definitely surprising. Naive to think it, but definitely surprising. And the amount of change individuals can handle, change was all I wanted to do. And I had we've talked how easy it is to do those low hanging fruits. Not a lot of individuals or team members or employees. That's a lot for people to handle. It's like the fire hose times 100. And you, the steward of the business, may see all the value in long-term changes like that, but you have to understand the pace of it, and you have to understand the right timing of it. And that surprised me because I was just go. We got to do this, got to keep going. And we lost valuable team members because of that in the first year. It was too much, and I get it. And I didn't expect that, you rally the troops. You're like, let's do this. You guys are you're on board for this vision. We have a list of 500 things we're going to do in the next month, and they're like, so, those were 2 of 1,000, I think, caught me off guard. Yeah.
That's great. Tim. Okay. Well, so I want to wrap here with talking about where you are today, where you want to get to. But tee us off by this progression where year one was doing, you had said, doing a lot of the low hanging fruit. That's pretty straightforward. I mean, despite how hard year one was in kind of getting your arms around the business, learning cash flow management, dusting some of the stuff off was straightforward, wrapping trucks, et cetera. Yeah. The cosmetics, if you will, of the business. And so now that you tell us where you are today, and then tell us how things are different today, and the problems that you solve are different.
Yeah. I think what you see is when you make those small changes that have the trajectory of being long-term impacts. In economics, they used to refer to them as like green shoots. Those green shoots, you look around and you're like, oh, this new software, this new way to do job costing, these new vans, you don't see those changes right away. And after that year one, what we started to see was like, wow, we were actually getting calls in the office because people saw our vans driving on the highway. We got 2 new employees because they saw our vans and wanted to jump ship. The software, our margins popped by significant amount just because we were measuring. Those things start to take root. And so you're like, great, they're low hanging fruit. They weren't to optimize short term, they were optimized long term. So you have that natural kind of push. And that really helped. I think the other thing I did was really focus on putting myself out there to build those relationships, and putting yourself out there to really almost garner relationships for referrals and specifiers. That was huge because we took the time to care and listen and see what they wanted in a relationship. So when they're building a home for a client, that we're a good partner to bring it on. And I would go out to people's homes, understand what really they valued versus what not. So we changed our design philosophy. We're a very atypical type of residential technology company because we're not telling what you need. We are listening for what it is, those things, and helping advise the things that fit. And that is different. And I'm very proud of that. I think that's the Trusted Advisor. It's one wonderful book I had read like 9 times in my career. It's that philosophy, listen for what they need, be that jungle guide. So we've doubled the business in revenue. We're, I think, 15% bottom line at this point. The year is ending really strong. So we'll cross my fingers. I'll definitely support any institution and any person who's listening to this that EOS is a great tool. For me, it just solidified some of the many things I had learned into one playbook. So we adopted that last year. I have a really amazing leadership team that I can rely on. So I'm not feeling every wave, every ripple in the ocean of running the business. And we've solidified the team. We know who we are. So hiring is much more vetted. I mean, I was hiring as quick as I could to support the demand. Well, now we're more under resourced than we've ever been, but we are so deliberate in hiring because of the culture aspect. Mm-hmm. So I think what philosophically you understand at this point when you've doubled a small business is you know who you are and you know what decisions you need to make in order to continue that growth, and you know the landmines to look out for. And I'm not saying that tomorrow I'm going to get punched in the face or that we have an unexpected event happen, but you're ready to handle those moves. And now you can think strategically for getting to 10 million. And so when you're playing that out to get to 10 million, I think what the past 4 years taught me was I'm a much more well-vetted strategist now than if I just sat at a larger company and optimized the business. I think we'd be at a similar revenue, at a similar SD than we are now. That would be okay. Like, that's not awful. But part of this journey for me was to build the most reputable company I could build, was to really feel satisfied at the end of the day. We built a strong entity, a strong company that provided value to clients. And by going in the weeds for those first 4 years, I'm able to do that now.
Mm-hmm. And so reflecting back, would you have chosen to buy small again? Really? I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, it was so painful. It's hard to advocate pain.
It's so hard.
But when you reflect back on it, it was incredibly valuable time served in prison.
Yeah, it was. Like I said, I'm open to share. Like, it was a really personal, trying moment. My dad passed away in the first year I bought the business, and
wow.
And he was going through a really difficult fight with dementia, and like, you're going through COVID, and you have kids at home, and if you wipe that aside, and then the first journey of buying small, I don't want to go through those personal journeys again. I don't want to buy small again. But I also know that if I didn't go through all those things, we wouldn't be where we are today, and I wouldn't be who I was today. So I would have, I've heard some of your participants who buy small. Every one of them is looking at it, I think, a lot more sharply than I did. They're understanding it's an iterative journey. And I think that if you're toying with this idea of becoming an entrepreneur, just beware, buying small doesn't mean it's easier at all. And I think if you're looking to do this, the questions you should ask yourself is, am I ready for the journey? Am I ready for the field position moments? And that should be agnostic of size. So no, I wouldn't buy small again, but I am super grateful for the past 4 years of my life, because however you want to call it, those experiences have made me ready to do what I really set out to do. And I think if it was different, I wouldn't be in that spot.
Perfect, Tim. Perfect note to end on, I think.
Great.
If people want to reach out to you, how do you like them to do that?
Yeah, please do. It's Tim Lahey, TIMLAHEY at rhometech.com, RHOMETECH.com. I'm on LinkedIn too. Like the reason why I love your podcast and the reason why I love listening to it and this group is because the gratification I get about just talking to people in the same boat or who are looking at it. That's one of the most amazing things about it. There's a lot of like-minded people doing this. Mm-hmm. It's a hard journey, but we're somewhat cut from the same cloth. So I'm happy to talk to anyone about it.
Well, that's a very generous offer, Tim. You'll no doubt serve as listener. Some listener out there is Doug Cook. You are now that for somebody else. So it should feel good. You've well deserved. Congratulations on doubling the business through a very hard first year. And probably we didn't really hear much about years 2, 3, and 4, but I gather that they were difficult too, although maybe not quite as fetal.
Yeah.
So look forward to hearing you, watching your journey as you get to 10 million, Tim.
Thanks, Will.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come. Stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.